Cristian Terhes. He is a European Member of Parliament. That's why we do it in English, because my Romanian is not so good. Welcome, Cristian.
Thank you so much for having me, Ursula.
It is a privilege and an honor to have you in the show. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got involved in politics, mainly in European politics?
Yeah, it's, I try to make the long story short. I'm an Eastern Rite Catholic priest. I immigrated to the United States in 2002. I've been living in the United States for 17 years. Then I received a call from Romania to run and become a member of the European Parliament. I was well known in Romania for many years because I was a strong defender of fundamental rights, human rights, independence of the judiciary in Romania for many years. And, I decided to make this step and serve my people from an elected office. I asked to be relieved of all of my priesthood duties while I'll be serving my people in politics. And I received this pension, I will call, to do this. And in 2019, I was elected in the parliament. And since then, I'm trying to fight for the respect of fundamental rights, pretty much of all the Europeans, not only of Romanians. And this is who I am today. I would say the voice of liberty in the European Parliament, defending the fundamental rights, fighting against the mandatory vaccination and imposing the green certificate on any or on every aspect of the Europeans' life.
So we will get more into detail about some aspects that you already mentioned. When I think about Romania, I've been there a few times, but the thing that made a biggest impression on me was actually when I was a little kid and I watched this trial live. Now, you said this picture might not be from the real trial. Can you tell us a bit more about how it was to be a Romanian living through this time?
Yeah, I was 11 years old when communism collapsed in Romania. I remember the ugliest times, I would say, of the 80s, when as kids we had to stay in line from 4 a.m. for 5 a.m. In order to buy bread, in order to buy milk, because everything was rationalized. In my case, for example, we were 4 members in my family, and we were allowed to buy only 2 breads per day because the ratio was 1/2 of a bread per person. So we had pretty much a coupon. With that coupon, you could buy only that many breads. You could not buy more than that. And since everything was rationalized and the food was never enough for everybody, you had to stay in line for the ratio that was designated to you. This is how we raised up. This is how we grew up. This is how our childhood was, and we still remember that. I have also interesting, I would say, family story, because I come from a family that was persecuted by communists for political reasons and for religious reasons. My church was the only church abolished by the communists in 1948. And for that reason, my family was persecuted and discriminated against since 1948. As far as political reasons, members of my family were part of the party that I'm also part of now. All the political parties were abolished by communists in 1946, 1947, and all of their members were thrown in jail. And my party was one of the most persecuted party by communists. We have in our blood, I would say, the fight for liberty, the fight for human rights, and the fight against totalitarian regimes, regardless if they are communist regimes or fascist regimes, because we had in Romania such regimes between the 2 wars. And my party had the strongest leaders and the strongest voices, I would say, against fascist regimes as well as against communist regimes. So growing up with these models, I would say, of strong fighters for human rights, for fundamental rights, for true democracy, and for liberty. This is how I grew up, and these are the values, I would say, that I try to fight for. And as far as the picture they are showing, yeah, it's not from the actual trial. I think it's from one of the movies or documentaries done after the trial. But yes, in December 1989, after December 22nd, 23rd, when dictator Ceausescu was, he got cut by the revolutionaries. There was a trial, but many call it a sham trial because it did not follow the procedures even at that time. But at the end of the day, he was convicted and executed, immediately after the trial. Now, I remember that time, everybody in Romania was very happy after he was shot, because everybody thought that just by killing one dictator, then you're done with communism. Now we've seen now after decades that when you talk about communism, it's not about the person, it's about the mentality and a kind of mindset, I would say, that we are still battling right now. This is the reason why us from the East, we are so, we are able, I would say, to recognize so easily any deviation from democracy and label it as a tyrannical communist deviation, because we've been there, done that. The Western world was luckier than us, because the Western world, since the Second World War, they haven't had any tyrannical regimes over there. So anything that the people in the Western world know about tyranny, it's either from the news media or from historical books and maybe from some personal testimonies of their grandparents, because even not many parents are living anymore or were born when Nazism or fascism was in Western world. And this is the reason maybe why not that many people yet fully understand the complexity of these tyrannical regimes. Because when you look at them, it's not the outcome that matters, it's the method. So if you identify the same methods being employed by the governments, you immediately know that there's a problem. So this is, I think, why us from the Eastern Europe are so, more, we have, I would say, the democratic antibodies, to be able to identify immediately this very virus of totalitarianism and take a strong position against it.
Yes, I feel that as well. It is very clear that people from Eastern Europe are more aware of what is really going on. You are also a member of the European Parliament, but what does it mean to be a member of the Parliament?
Well, if you look in the treaty says that the Parliament has the role to legislate. It has two major roles: to legislate and to perform the budgetary control on how the money of the European citizens are spent. Well, that's just on paper, because in fact it doesn't happen. The reality is any member of the Parliament itself does not have the possibility to initiate any legislation. The legislation is initiated by the European Commission, and then us as the European Parliament, and then the Council. Each one is voting separately, and then they have to come up with a compromise in a trialogue and then vote again to agree on the final text. So the Parliament is not the actual legislative body of the European Union. It's more like the co-legislative or co-legislative body. As far as the budgetary control, I mean, this is just on paper, because the matter of the fact is, in the case of these vaccines, for example, that were purchased by the European Commission, the contracts that were signed between Ursula von der Leyen and these medical companies were never disclosed to the public nor to the members of the European Parliament, implicitly to the members of the budgetary control. So they voted on the way the European Commission spent the money of the European citizens. They said everything is okay, but they haven't been able to see the contracts. So my question to them was, well, how were you able to vote on something that you never saw? So this is the situation where we are right now. If you look at how all these EU institutions are performing, there's no real democracy at the top of the European institutions. It's just a lot of talk, empty talk, a lot of propaganda, and all these institutions are so far away from the people. This is the reason why pretty much they don't care about what they do, because they know that nobody can make them accountable.
Yes, that is one thing that is common in all countries. It is far removed from the people. There's a few layers, I would say, between the people and the members of the European Parliament, we in Holland don't even know who is representing us unless you are really interested in it and look it up.
Well, it would be important for your people to look into who's representing you in the European Parliament, because 70% of the legislations passed by the national parliaments are legislations passed at the EU level. So you are electing your people in your national parliaments, but the only thing that they have to do in the 70% of the cases, at least that's the case in Romania, 70 or 75% of whatever the Romanian parliament is passing as a legislation is just the implementation of EU legislation. So if you don't have strong defenders of your rights, of your sovereignty, of your democracy at the national level in the European Parliament, then you're in big problem. You as a country and you as people, because you don't have strong voices to defend your fundamental rights. So this, I think, the crisis that we are in right now, and this decision, I would say, of the EU institutions to impose this green certificate on people, it's I hope, a wake-up call for many Europeans to understand the impact of these Europarliamentary elections and the importance of voting people in the European Parliament that will defend your sovereignty, your national sovereignty, and the fundamental rights of your citizens.
Do you understand that people want to leave the EU?
I understand why so many people want to leave the EU.
And why do you think
well, look, the European project, if you look initially, was a great project. The reality is this European project, as it was envisioned by the founding fathers of the European community, like Schuman and Adenauer, it was a great project. They tried and they were successful to bring peace in the Western world through prosperity. The problem is in the last 30 years, after the Treaty of Maastricht, 1992, they changed the European community to the European Union. They talk about more inclusion between the countries, including political inclusiveness. And when you talk about political inclusiveness, that means that someone outside of your country is trying to make a political decision in your own country. And this is what is causing all the problems. If they kept, if they would have kept the European community as an economical community, focusing on bringing prosperity, peace through prosperity, and to be an open market, everything would have been great. The problem is now you see unelected officials at the top layer of the European institutions trying to corner and blackmail countries, sovereign countries, to do certain things maybe against their people. That's where the problem is. And many people at the lower level, they think, well, it's the EU's fault. That's the reason why the only solution is to leave the EU. But I believe, this is my personal position. I think the European project, it's an important project and we have to save it, because we live in a global economy the way it is right now. We like it or we don't. And it would have been very hard for any European country to compete alone against big players like China or Russia or India, for example. But on the other side, what is happening right now in the European Union, it is not okay at all. So imagine if now, when you still hold, we still have sovereign nations, look at the causes, look at the problems caused by the green certificate. So imagine if they want to federalize the European Union, as many claimed, like Macron and the new Chancellor of Germany, or Guy Verhofstadt from the European Parliament, or the Renew Group from the European Parliament. Imagine what would have happened then when you see that your fundamental rights are stripped away from you by some unelected bureaucrats. That would have been a big problem. And I think we still have to fight to restore liberty, justice, and respect for fundamental rights in the European Union.
Okay, so let's zoom in on that parliament. Let's say we want to save it and we want to return to a pre-Maastricht Treaty era where we have economic cooperation. Which parties are in favor of it? Can you give us a brief overview how the parliament works as factions?
Yes, you see the ECR group that I'm part of and the ID group. So 63 maps plus 70 maps. These are the only one, and some of them from the non-affiliates. I would say we are the only one fighting heavily fighting, strongly fighting to keep the sovereignty of the national states. I mean, we are not necessarily saying that we should move back to as Europe was prior to 1992. What we are saying is that this European project was envisioned as a union of sovereign national states. I mean, that's the reality. Nobody envisioned this project as a federation like USSR was in the 50s or 60s. So we have to look back. What was the initial project? What was the vision, and how can we maintain this initial vision? Because clearly, what is it happening right now? It is violating all the principles of the European Union. Now you're looking at this chart right now. EPP, for example, is one of the strongest supporters of federalizing the European Union. In other words, moving away even more rights and more prerogatives and more decisions from the national level to a centralized bureaucratic and unelected institutions. Renew Europe, the same. Greens, they are over there. And the further we move to the left, they want more and more federalization and more centralization of power. Their narrative is, we need a bigger Europe. We need more Europe, more Europe. What we are saying is that, no, we don't need more Europe. We need a better Europe. And a better Europe means a Europe that is closer to the people. A better Europe is not the one where all the decisions are taken in Brussels behind closed doors by only few people. Few people cannot take decisions for 450 million people. It's absurd. Because every national state, every nationality, every county, region in Europe, has its own particularities. It should be the local, these decisions. I mean, even the Treaty of European Union said this. The two basic principles that the EU was based on is the principle of transparency and the principle that the decision should be taken as close as possible to the citizens. So now they want to move as many decisions as possible further away from the people and in the hands of very few unelected bureaucrats, which is absurd. And we are fighting against it. So you're looking right now at this, and if you see everything from EPP to the left, they are all supporting this madness. EPP, Renew, Greens, S&D, and the left.
So what do you advise? Should we participate also in the European elections as independent people, or form new parties? How can we turn this around?
The solution is political. And when I mean political, I mean to elect in the European Parliament parties, or people from parties that are supporting your national sovereignty. That means parties that are part of the ECR group or the ID group. ID, it's even on certain things even more strong on certain things that we are in the ECR group. And you have to find those parties at your national level and make sure that they fight for this. National sovereignty, the decision to be taken by your elected officials. Everyone should respect your basic fundamental rights, and you should never ever cave on these principles. Because if you elect a party, for example, that's part of the EPP or the Renew group, for example, these people, they behave like an army. These are just soldiers. They are not MEPs representing the people. They are just members listening to their chairs of the group. If the chair says vote up or down, that's how they do it, regardless if it's happening or not the people. I mean, ID group, for example, is coming up with amendments on so many reports or resolutions or legislative proposals, that are good for the people. They are just voted down without debate, without anything, just because they are coming from ID. Same thing with some of the amendments proposed by ECR. But in the upcoming weeks, I will reveal all of this, because it's important for the Europeans to understand the kind of game is played in the European Parliament, so they will know next time who to vote for.
Clear. You have already made quite an impression with a few press conferences. I think this was the first one.
Yes.
What was it about, and who were there with you?
There were like 4 colleagues, or 4 in the first press conference. Myself, Ivan Sinčić from Croatia, Christine Anderson from Germany, and Francesca Donato from Italy. Myself is from the ECR group. Christine Anderson is from the ID group. and Ivan and Francesca are from the non-affiliates, or the non-inscrit, as they call it, NI, on the previous chart that you just had. And we had a press conference because we were deeply concerned about the way the green certificate is being used in Europe. And unfortunately, all the worries that we had, they proved to be legit and founded, because look what is happening right now. So with this press conference, when we saw that so many people are supporting our cause, and they were happy that we spoke up. And in reality, we've been speaking up against these measures from the beginning, but we've done it in a procedural way. For example, during speeches in the parliament, during committee meetings, all these things, but people are not watching those debates apparently. So when we had this press conference, you know, and it was shared all over the world. I mean, we receive emails from, you know, all these countries, you know, even outside of the EU. We decided to keep continuing doing this, and we've been doing this, and you know, we are happy that people are responding positively to this, and we will keep doing it until freedom and justice for all is restored in the European Union. Absolutely,
because what I see here is the new Europe, connecting to the people directly instead of shielding it away from the people. Yeah. I can imagine that your fellow MEPs from the other factions were not happy about this.
There were some people who were not happy at all, but you know, the only thing that we care is about the people. So, you know, at the end of the day, we were elected to represent them. You know, each one of us is elected by our national constituents to represent them. But you know, at the end of the day, again, we are there and we have to fight for the rights of all, because it will not help me at all if I know that in Romania, for example, the rights of the Romanians are respected, but the one in Germany or Austria are not. So we have to give a voice to everybody who's oppressed right now. I mean, physically oppressed in the European Union, and we are doing that.
Yeah, we also had some pushback from Holland, but a lot of people in Holland didn't even know this. So Rob Roken and his faction were actually adamant against the green certificate, or digital green certificate. It unfortunately didn't pass, but how was the vote?
Well, we have the when we had the press conference, there was the decision that we made was not to have, you know, like tens of MEPs from the beginning, because, you know, we could have easily had that if we wanted. The idea was to have support from the other groups. And it was very hard, I have to tell you, to convince people from the other groups to join this, because, you know, we had people from the left or from the Greens or from EPP, but when the leadership of the groups found out what they want to do, they said, well, you know, if you do this, you know, we will expel you from the group. So, you know, the bottom line is
very democratic.
Yes, it's very democratic, exactly. This is what happened in the USSR. So it's, you know, they are copying, you know, bad models, you know, from tyrannical regimes, not from democratic regimes or states, I would say. So yeah, this is where we are right now. But at the national level, or even in the parliament, you know, you will find MEPs that are supporting, you know, even if they are not part of the press conferences, for example, they are supporting these initiatives to fight this, to do this. I mean, there were 100 and some MEPs who voted against the implementation of the green certificate, for example. So these are all people that have an issue with this green certificate, either because the procedure was too fast, either because this by violating fundamental rights, or because it's not actually stopping the spread of the virus. Each one of them has different reasons why voted, you know, against this green certificate. But the bottom line is there were over 100 people, 100 MEPs who voted against. But what I want to emphasize here is the importance of the citizens and of the European citizens here. You know, they have to contact their MEPs and ask them to join this cause. It's not, and I'm intentionally saying not my cause. It's not my cause. It's not about me here. You know, if I want to do something, I do it for the Romanians in Romania. This is an issue that it's affecting all the Europeans, regardless where they are. So we have to unite here and together fight, I would say, to restore respect for fundamental rights and democratic principles in the European Union.
Clear. So I believe that this vote will come up again in 2022. What can we expect in June? Exactly.
because the agreement was that when the regulation to approve the green certificate was voted in the final version, the decision was to have it valid just for 1 year. So it's from June 2021 to June 2022. In case they want to expand the validity of this green certificate, that this issue has to come up to vote again. So all the European citizens will have to gear up starting now and call their MEPs to tell them to vote against against prolonging, the green certificate. If they can, we will try to push, to have it, even before that rejected. But let's say as the last resort, this should not be prolonged after June 2022.
Clear. And now we have a lot of ammunition because we see fraud in the clinical trials. We see the incapability of the shots to stop transmission.
Yes.
We see the hardship or the polarization between the vaccinated and unvaccinated. It has completely failed, the green digital certificate.
Yeah, the green certificate, I said it from the beginning. It is not certifying anything because it's not protecting you from getting the virus and spreading the virus. And nevertheless, it's not, as they call it, it was implemented initially to facilitate the freedom to facilitate, that's what they call it. And I said it's not going to facilitate anything. It's going to condition basic fundamental rights or the exercise of basic fundamental rights. And unfortunately, it proved to be true, what I said. Because look what is happening now. You cannot enter stores, you cannot go to classes if you're a student anymore, if you cannot work anymore in many places or parts of the European Union unless you're vaccinated. You show proof of a green certificate, which is simply absurd.
Well, that brings us to another part. There is a lot of corruption. Corruption will always be there, but specifically on this European level, we see that there were emails that were leaked. I read them. And you see that there was a lot of pressure from the European Commission onto the EMA to approve it. Although we see that there were problems with the clinical trials that were flagged by the EMA, yet it was pushed through.
Well, I'm not so familiar with this particular issue with the hacked emails. But what I can tell you for a fact is I have official answers from EMA on certain things, and there are many issues with the way these so-called vaccines were approved, and we will have to find a way to dig deeper into this in 2022.
If we look at the conditional marketing authorization, it is also only valid when the conditions are met, and it's only valid for 1 year. So the 21st of December, the first one was given to Pfizer/BioNTech. So I think apart from the green digital certificate, we should also keep pushing on the EMA to not grant another conditional marketing authorization. And just to show the people, here we see members of the European Commission being part of the EMA. And this is the commission that the CHMP that gives this conditional marketing authorization.
There's a lot of corruption, and the biggest reason why there's so much corruption is because there's lack of transparency. And this is where we are. Any corrupt government and any tyrannical government, it's not disclosing data, and it's not transparent. This is what we see happening here. I mean, if the contracts are not fully disclosed right now to the public, imagine what else is not disclosed. That's the problem. Exactly.
Well, one thing we will get to, because Ursula von der Leyen, I think she is the head of the European Commission. She has close ties to left with Merkel. Well, Merkel, of course, has stepped down, but she has been the motor of the European project with Bill Gates, who is one of the biggest investors in vaccines, with Klaus Schwab, who is a proponent of the fourth industrial revolution and the Great Reset. And in the right upper corner, you see her with Heiko, and Heiko is her husband. They look like a lovely couple. The only problem is he is the CEO of a gene therapy based company. So, of course, when you're at that level, you meet a lot of people, but I find it very troublesome that there is such a coziness between influencers, lobbyists, politicians, and people from the industry.
And on top of that, what the media reported, and I checked it, and it's true, her husband, Ursula von der Leyen's husband, it's a member of some of these companies that are in very close tie with Pfizer.
Exactly.
That's a problem in itself, because there's a clear conflict of interest there. But again, in the upcoming year, we will be looking deeper into this.
Yes, and this has also come up because the one that I didn't put there was the picture she has with Burla. Burla is the CEO of Pfizer. There was a lot of back and forth emailing and texting that she covered up. She is not disclosing, and they are deleting all these communications. So that plays into your point of non-transparency, which is quite astounding at this level.
Yes, and they do this, they cover their tracks, and the thing is they created a rule. We have that in the European Parliament as well, and I'm totally against it. So if you don't move, if you don't physically move, for example, an email from inbox to one of the folders, after 90 days, the email will be automatically deleted. But look, anything you send to the European, it's a public record that anyone should have access to. You cannot delete or allow emails to be deleted, by default, because at the end of the day, people want to know how you made that decision, why you made it this way or that way, and then just by allowing these emails to be auto deleted, that's a problem. So this is an aspect that we will also focus on in the upcoming year.
Clear. Then there was the issue of you not even being able to enter your workplace. How is that coming along?
Well, I was the Bureau of the European Parliament adopted a decision. I think it was in October 23rd or so, that by November 3rd, we are not allowed to enter any buildings of the European Parliament unless we show proof of a valid green certificate. That means vaccination, testing, or proof of going through this infection. Well, I had COVID last year in October. I'm not vaccinated, and sometimes I do tests. For example, when I go in Brussels I go from Romania to Brussels, I always do tests because I have to. Otherwise, you have problems going to airports and stuff. So. But from the beginning, I said I am not going to oblige or to obey, whatever you want to call it, this decision of the Bureau for multiple reasons. And one of the reasons is I cannot allow my mandate as an elected member of the European Parliament to be conditioned by such an administrative and abusive act. And in the first day, after November 3rd, when I went to the office, I think it was November 9th, if I'm not mistaken, I was not allowed to enter because I refused to show the green certificate, and I was not allowed to enter. The second day when I went, nobody asked me for such a green certificate, so I was able to enter the building without any questions asked. The third day, that's when I posted a clip online after that. They asked me for the green certificate, and I started recording my encounter with the guards, with the security guards from the European Parliament. And after, minutes of arguments, they said, yeah, we cannot stop you, so I entered. And since that day, every time when I entered the building, I started recording myself from the plaza outside of the Parliament all the way through, because I want to make sure that I record everything. I want to make sure that everything is on record. And when the time will come, there's proof of these abusive times. I know it's just a matter of time before everything is going to fall apart. The funny part is I received a letter on December 2nd, 2021, from the President of the European Parliament, threatening me to punish me for not complying with this decision of the Bureau. And he gave me until December 9th to reply back and, present my position, why I kept entering the building without showing the green certificate. And I replied back to him. And I told him what I had to say, and then we will see what he will decide. And besides many things that I told him, I said, because the letter from him was in Romanian, and I said, look, I want the correspondence between us on this matter to be in English, because when the time is going to come and history is going to write or be written about these ugly times and dark times, I want to make sure that your position is properly stated, so we will see what will happen. But I said, I take my responsibility, and I'm telling you up front now, I will not comply with such a totalitarian act to allow my mandate as an elected member of the parliament to be conditioned by these things. But here's something interesting, because we talked about democracy. So imagine that if you move back to that, or people might remember now, the slide they show with how the European Parliament is divided right now among groups. Imagine that in the Bureau of the European Parliament, the one that adopted this decision that is conditioning the entrance in the Parliament by having the green certificate, there's no representative from the ECR group and from the ID group. So we don't have anyone over there. 130, 40 MEPs do not have any representatives in the Bureau of the Parliament to represent their interests. So this is where we are, It's the only parliament in the world. We had a colleague, that lived in Bosfina Fato, I think that's how it's called, that country, and she said that even in the parliament in that country, it's more democratic than the European Parliament, because the Bureau of the Parliament should have representatives from all the political groups. So the European Parliament does not have representatives from the ECR group nor from ID group. So this is where we are, but we are still keeping the fight on. And I restate and re-emphasize the importance of the Euro-Parliamentarian elections. And for those that are listening to us, to understand what is at stake here. If you don't have elected members that really understand their job, their duty, and they are not fully dedicated to the sovereignty of their own country and to defend the rights of the people, this is where we are. But hopefully in the upcoming legislation, we will have strong voices from all national states to fight for their own citizens at the end.
So what was astounding to me, I saw it happening in Australia, and then it also happened in Latvia. It was almost not in the news. You're fighting for it, you can still enter the building, but I believe that in Latvia, it's even not the green certificate, but if you are
vaccinated.
Yeah. And they are not paid anymore.
But this is abuse from the beginning to end. And this is where we are right now. There is an attack to the legislative power, which is compromising and undermining the separation of powers in the state and any constitutional democracy. This is why people have to raise up. The solution to this problem is political, by electing people who will fight for your rights. But until we will have elections in our own countries, people have to protest. There's no other solution to this right now.
Completely agree. And then what is so hypocritical, there's no outcry about Latvia, but there is an outcry about Poland because they're not falling in line. They do not accept the European court above the Polish Constitutional Court, which is exactly that point of sovereignty. How do you see this case?
Well, Poland is defending its sovereignty in relationship to the EU institutions, and this is an important subject here, and it's more related to a judicial discussion. The supreme law of the land is the constitution of every country. Nothing is above the constitution. Now remember, EU is not a country. EU is a union formed of national sovereign states that all decided to be part of this union. In other words, to put certain attributes in common for the common good. Nowhere, there's no provision in any treaty that these countries lost their sovereignty. That is totally false. When they tried to have a European constitution, if you remember, 14 years ago, every time when that constitution was up to vote, people rejected that because nobody wants to be led by people, by unelected people from Brussels. I mean, from Romania to Brussels is 1,800 kilometers. They don't give a damn about what is happening in whatever corner of Romania. We want to have elected people that's closer to us, not as far away from us. So any treaty, when countries sign up, for example, to be part of the European Union, they have to sign up the treaty to adhere to this union. a treaty has to be in accordance with the constitution of each country. That's how it works. So the constitution is the supreme law of the land. The Treaty of the European Union, on the other side, clearly states what are the prerogatives of the EU institutions, the full prerogatives or the sole prerogatives. Which one are the prerogatives where the countries share competences with the EU institutions? And any other prerogatives that doesn't fall under these two categories, it's the prerogative of the national state. Now, what is happening and what was happening in the last 15 years, the European Commission, with the help of ECJ, the European Court of the the Court of the European Union, Court of Justice of the European Union, it's stealing away pretty much attributes from the national states and giving them to the EU institutions, namely the European Commission, despite clear provisions in the Treaty of the European Union. So the Constitutional Court of Poland, when he was notified about such a case, they said, look, that's clearly whatever decision of ECJ, it's against the Polish constitution because they interfere with prerogatives, with attributes that are solely the prerogative of the national government. So, we've seen happening this more and more all across Europe. And I have to congratulate the Polish government and the Polish Constitutional Court for standing up on defending the sovereignty of Polish state.
We also see this now happening in most Eastern European countries, I would say, probably because of the reason previously stated about being part of a totalitarian regime. But then you see again this hypocritical outcry from the West in this case. So the president of Croatia reprimanded Austria for installing fascist regulations, for having a lockdown for the unvaccinated and having a vaccine mandate, which I think is indeed a fascist way of oppressing people. Yet he came under scrutiny by the other members.
Yeah, I mean, the reaction of the Croatian president was a legit one, because when we say that these measures are fascist or Nazist measures, many people are, well, you're too exaggerated. No, we are not exaggerating. And in order to prove that, it's enough to look back at history. Look at the Nuremberg trial, for example. There were groups of doctors that, from those Nazi concentration camps that were tried, and many of them convicted and even executed by doing tests on people against their will. That's the reason why we have the so-called the Nuremberg Code. That's not a legal binding document, I would say. It's more like a set of principles. But then the Council of Europe came up with the so-called Oviedo Convention, which clearly states that the states should not impose any medical treatment on anybody. Any medical treatment should be the result of the free choice of the person after an informed consent. Now, the Oviedo Convention was ratified at the country level by the national parliaments. But there's something more to it. The Charter of Basic Fundamental Rights in the European Union in Article 3, paragraph 2, clearly states, this is an EU law, so it's above the national or the discussion at the national level if the national countries ratify or not the Oviedo Convention. The EU law that these bureaucrats are trying to defend and trying to punish Poland for allegedly not respecting the EU law. Again, the EU law clearly states, this is in the Charter of the Basic Fundamental Rights in the European Union, Article 2, paragraph 2, Article 3, paragraph 2, that says the following: in the matter or in the field of biology and medicine, no medical treatment should be imposed on anybody unless the person decides about it freely and after informed consent, period. So what we see happening now, it's violating both of these conditions, These are concurrent conditions, not one or the other. No, the consent has to be freely and after an informed consent. In other words, you should not be pressured by anything, by anybody from outside of you to make a decision, either pro or against. But the informed consent means that you have to have access to all the information before you make a decision, because you cannot make a decision freely if you don't have access to all the information. And we clearly do not have right now access to all the information, and the basic proof is the one with the contract, with the fact that the contract will not fully disclose yet. So this is where we are, and this is the reason why we have to keep fighting for it.
So in some countries, it is happening. Slovenia is taking it, has taken it to court, and the top court rejected the vaccination rule for public sector employees. This is a big win, because this is exactly based on what you just mentioned. I cannot state enough how important this is. This means that it is invalid in all European countries.
Yes, but here's the thing. The decision at the end is still a political decision, because the judges appointed in the constitutional court, these are politically appointed judges. And we cannot allow as free citizens, all of our rights and all of our liberties to depend on the decision of 7, 9, or 11 judges. The issue at the end and the final defense for the fundamental rights, it's political. You need a political majority formed of politicians who have respect for the rights of the people who elected them. So the campaign that we are starting right now in Romania, for example, is simple. We tell all the politicians, if you vote to impose the green certificate in Romania, we will guarantee that you and your party will never, ever be elected again in office, anywhere in Romania. This is what they need to understand. If you threat our rights, we will make sure that you and your party will never be elected again. Simple. Because we cannot allow this, we cannot allow and hope and pray to God that 9 judges or 7 judges or 11 judges from constitutional court, maybe they have the, strong bones, I would say, to fight any pressure put on them, and hopefully they will defend our rights. No, if they do that, thank for them, and we should be grateful for that. But we cannot just rely on that. We have to also defend our rights, and we have to make it clear to all the politicians, you vote against us, we will make sure that you will never ever be elected in office, you and your party. Simple as that.
Clear. So a few days ago, you had another press conference. Now it was taken a step further, because it is about the digital identity, the digital surveillance, coupled with the QR code. This is feeling and looking and smelling like the social credit system.
Yes, I had 2 speeches in the plenary of the parliament where I accused the European Commission of Chinification of Europe. I accused Ursula von der Leyen of this in multiple speeches, but now we have concrete examples of it. Because if you impose the QR code everywhere, and then they want to talk about they already talk about the so-called European Social Security Card or pass, which will be used to facilitate the right to work. I mean, last time when we heard about facilitating the right to travel, where we ended up with, with this green certificate being imposed everywhere. This is what I even said in the parliament. Then they have a discussion about the European wallet ID, where they want to store all of our passwords and credit cards and bank accounts and everything, so because we are too dumb to protect our identity, we have to give all these details, and allow the European Commission to police our own identity and passwords and everything. And the European EID, it's called the European ID, which is similar, is going into that direction. And, at the end of the day, you look at the Green Deal, for example, where they want to reduce the emission of the CO2 by 55% by 2030. And the way to do that is by rationalizing everything in Europe. I mean, that's what they said, that they have to control what people eat, where people travel and all that. And the only way to do that is to surveil everybody. And I mentioned at the beginning of this interview that in the communist Romania, we had to stay in line to buy bread and all that. I think the same thing will happen here. If you will eat or you want to buy, for example, some kind of meat, for example, then they say, well, this meat, it's producing too much CO2, you have to pay higher taxes if you want to have the privilege of eating, that kind of meat. So we will see what happens, but I'm totally against it, and my colleagues are totally against it. And the people of Europe should be very aware about the direction, the new direction of the European Union, because what we've seen happening now is a transition of EU from a democracy to a tyranny under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen. On the other side, or at the same time, we see the Chinification of Europe. EU unfortunately lost the moral ground in this battle with China and Russia, because you cannot lecture anymore Putin or the president of China or the Communist Party in China how they should respect the basic fundamental right and the democratic principles when you, from the position of the European Commission or the president of the European Commission, you are the first one calling for the rights of your own citizens to be abused. So
I think you put it in one of your speeches very concise. It is tyranny when the government knows everything about you, and it's democracy when you know everything about the government.
Because it's a matter of transparency. Historically, if you look at all the tyrannical regimes, the first thing that they've done, or you went hand to hand, they became less transparent, and they tried to control the media. So one is going, it's hand to hand with the other, lack of transparency and control of the media in order for the people not to know what's going on. This is the reason why we have to fight for transparency and for freedom of speech for everybody.
So some people already knew what was going on. Orban was one of them. Some people actually accuse him of being a dictator. I think he's a conservative and he's looking out for Romania. But he was onto it already in 2007.
For Hungary.
For Hungary. Yeah, sorry, for Hungary. Now, of course, Soros is a bit of a strange fella. He is also involved in most courts, and 200 people of the European Parliament are on a payroll paid by Soros.
Well, I don't know exactly how many people in the European Parliament are paid by Soros or not, but clearly some of his statements and what he's trying to do and his organizations are a problem. And there are judges at the European Court of Human Rights, judges at ECJ, judges at the national level that were part of his programs. And clearly when you see these people, promoting and supporting a certain agenda from the judicial system, implicitly you are raising concerns, and then you have legit thoughts and questions about what is going on. But at the end of the day, with or without Soros, the bottom line is it's important for the European citizens to understand the game here, the gameplay here, and the fact that it's their chance now to take their countries back.
Exactly. So there's a lot of protest going on. Unfortunately, the farmers' protest that I was looking forward to, that would take place in Brussels tomorrow and the day after, is not going ahead. The reason being the green digital certificate. The farmers do not dare to go because they have to go in quarantine, test, etc., etc. And this shows the problem right there, that it infringes upon so many basic human rights, and the right to protest and to demonstrate is such a fundamental right in every democracy.
Well, they've done it in such a way that will prohibit you from exercising certain rights, even to protest. For example, on October 2nd, I was at a protest in Romania. I was not wearing a mask, and I had a speech, and I received a fine, from the authorities. And in the document, it was said that that I had the guts pretty much to criticize these measures. That's the reason why they fined me. So I'm challenging that in court, but this is where we are. So from my position as an elected member of the European Parliament, I do everything in my power to fight for the rights of the Romanian citizens as well as all the European citizens.
You actually do. There's a lot of people just talk it, but you are with the demonstrators. I think this was last week.
Yes, in Brussels.
It was again a huge demonstration and an extreme reaction from the police with tear gas, barbed wire, water cannons. Yet today there was another protest.
Yes, the thing is, I saw the barbed wires. That's what shocked me. seen protests before with police officers geared up for urban warfare, I would say. But I never seen in my life in the Western world institutions surrounded by barbed wire. And I've seen that on October 8th in Brussels. The European Commission was surrounded by barbed wires and walls of barbed wires, which is the image itself, it's freaking you out. And clearly there were some agitators among the protesters.
They are identified as being part of the police.
Many of them, yes. Yeah. But that's this is the game that they play. If they want to break up a peaceful protest, they bring some people with masks that are creating some tensions over there, and then the police had the justification to come up and use water cannons and tear gas to split everybody apart. And that means again that these people, these unelected officials, are afraid of the people. And at the end of the day, it's up to the people if they want to allow themselves to be led by these tyrants or not. And I think this is the fight of our generation for freedom and liberty. And we should be, nevertheless, we should be honored by the opportunity that we have right now, because our kids and grandkids later on can hear our stories, that during these ugly times, these dark times, each one of us where we were, we fought for the rights of all. As we heard the stories, after the Second World War, how our grandparents fought against Nazism. So, as one president, US president said, freedom is just one generation away from extinction. And it is our job, our duty, our call, and our obligation to fight as hard as we can from where we are to defend freedom, liberty, fundamental rights, and democracy in the European Union.
Absolutely. Thank you for this conversation. I think it was very helpful for people to understand a little bit more about Europe and about, of course, the fight that you and your colleagues are fighting for us and for freedom.
Thank you so much for having me. And since we are before Christmas, I wish all of you Merry Christmas and God bless you.
Merry Christmas.